yes, we have to work in a globalised economy and a globalised diplomacy, and in a world where we have a global order that brings some sense to what's going on. But we also need, through that, to support and understand that people need a sense of belonging to their place, an identity, a recognition and support for their culture that makes them feel at home within that world order. You've even got a Scottish flag for me. That's a good welcome back. Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to meet some old friends and to return to ICD and the Academy and have this opportunity to contribute at a vital time for our world. When I accepted the invitation to come, could not possibly have imagined that my contribution would be after everything that has happened over the last few days. I texted a very close friend of mine who is in one of the probably half a dozen key positions in the United Nations. I'll not mention them by name or position to identify them, but and asked them how they were just 2 weeks ago, and at that point they said this is an era-changing moment in our lifetimes, and things are very difficult. And even then, I don't think we could have imagined what would have happened in the 2 weeks that would have followed a United Nations where, in the middle of an aggressive war, the United States votes with Russia in the General Assembly, a United Nations that is almost powerless to do anything about the current crisis, which is about to lose, I think, 50% of its humanitarian budget. Cutting large-scale programs across Sudan, Yemen and many other crises, leading almost certainly to the deaths of many of our citizens around the world. This is a really serious time. So, Mark, I'm grateful to you for changing the title of my talk almost at the last minute, because I do want to say something about, I think, is the really important role of the UK and Europe in this new world order. At the Berlin Economic Forum, you're going to focus over the next 2 days on trade and development, on technology, on the critical importance of education. But all of these are disrupted by a world that is filled with conflict, that is endangered by climate change, that is plagued by inequality. A world in 2025 where suddenly there are countries where no girls are allowed to go to school again. This is a very different world from that which we were inhabiting not too long ago. We have challenges and changes taking place in almost every continent. The glaring examples of the invasion of Ukraine, the carnage across large parts of the Middle East, not just Israel, Gaza, but the state of Lebanon and Syria and elsewhere too. The death and destruction that's taking place in Sudan and elsewhere. These are even one of these crises would be era-defining, but to have them all at the same time, but then to have other things happening, like I work in the Philippines quite a lot. Chinese attacks on the Philippines waters, their own boats and their own fishing boats in Philippines waters. The ongoing conflict in eastern DRC, and so on. All of these terrible events, I think, certainly make me reflect back 20 years. In 2005, when I was still First Minister, we welcomed the G8 to Scotland. This was a G8 summit that had within its number President Putin, that had George Bush, who was widely seen as, I think wrongly, but widely seen as the most right-wing American administration for decades. A G8 that had, if I may say so, I hope any Italians present are not offended, Silvino Berlusconi representing one of the great G8 powers, with all the inconsistencies and challenges that involved. And yet, a G8 that decided to invest properly, for the first time really seriously, in the Global South, to set up the global initiative to tackle the HIV/AIDS epidemic, to invest properly, heavily in official development assistance in the Global South and try and make poverty history, to invest in education and to change the debt arrangements so that many countries in the world were able to start to develop their own economies without that debt hanging over them. And yet today, 20 years on, all of that momentum, all of that creativity, all that positivity is in reverse. Me First has replaced the solidarity and the atmosphere and the world order that we were all trying to create. Remember responsibility to protect? The initiative set up by Canada in the early part of our new century, 2005, a World Summit agrees to have a responsibility to protect, where individual countries have a responsibility for their own citizens. But if they are not looking after them or they are persecuting them, then other countries have a responsibility to protect those citizens as well. In tatters in 2025. So yes, it is a new world order that we are seeing being created around us. And I believe very strongly that there is a critical role for Europe, despite all of the colonial past, despite all the difficulties and tensions that there are within our countries here in Europe, despite the recent tension between the UK and the rest of Europe, which has been damaging for you and probably, damaging for us and probably for Europe as well. There is a desperate need for the countries of Europe to come together and to provide some leadership in this difficult world, and to do it in partnership with others elsewhere. And I want to highlight briefly 5 areas where I think we need to point that way ahead. I have been a peace activist all my adult life. I've demonstrated, I've argued, I've made the case, I've advocated, I've done what I can. I mediate, I work in peace building in different parts of the world today. But I believe so strongly, number one, we need to build up our European defences and be ready and able to resist the pressure that we currently have, particularly on our eastern border. To me, the number one cause in Europe today has to be the defence, security and the sovereignty of Ukraine, a nation that has bravely fought back against an aggressor over the last 3 years and did not deserve to be treated in the White House on Friday the way that the President of Ukraine was treated by the President of the United States. So the first thing we need to do is to be ready. To secure peace, we have to be strong enough to ensure that those who want to be aggressors don't think that they have an easy ride. But the second point I would make is that we have to do that alongside development, action on conflict, and on climate around the world. That as Europeans, we have a responsibility, a historic responsibility, for many of the injustices and problems that still exist around the world, and we also have the capability and the resources to make a contribution to dealing with that. So alongside a stronger defence for Europe, I believe very strongly that we need to be investing in, engaging in an active diplomatic way, as the former ambassador said, in development, in the poorest countries in the world, in conflict prevention around the world, and in action on climate. And we have to be at the forefront of that as European nations. If we're not, we're abdicating our responsibility and we're building up the problems that will mean that our defences have to be even stronger in the future. These are the drivers of conflict. I read my own Prime Minister say at the weekend that conflict was the greatest driver of migration and poverty. Well, I would say that migration and poverty are amongst the greatest drivers of conflict. This is a two-way road, and we need to be pointing in both directions, working throughout the world for a better world at the same time as being prepared to defend ourselves. And that brings me to the third point, which is that I look with dismay at what's happened over recent times following the election of President Biden just 4 years ago, when he was talking about an alliance of democracies around the world, reinvigorating the case for democracy and transparency and the rule of law. And that, of course, has definitely gone off the agenda over those 4 years for many different reasons. But I think there is a real case, first of all, to be working with active democracies that are currently successful, not just seeing that Europe has all the answers, but building an alliance around the world that doesn't just stand up to terror and to aggression, but makes the positive case to the next generation for that kind of society being the best kind of society, the most stable, the most likely for people to prosper, and the most likely to be peaceful. And then to make the case to other democracies. We had in the middle of all this chaos last year, we had more elections, more people voting than ever before around the world in 1 year. And in many cases, they elected people who are not very keen on democracy. So we need to go out there and make the case for democracy, for transparency, for the rule of law, and do it with allies, Japan in the East, South Korea, and many countries in different continents that are willing to come out with us, stand in partnership for this kind of world, but also persuade other places that this is definitely the route, the route through which they must go. And then fourthly, I think we need to look to the longer term. We're not that far away from the 100th anniversary of the United Nations. It might seem like a long way away, but it's not actually. 20 years, it's not that far away. It took more than 20 years of debate and failure to create the United Nations. That debate had been going on for 30, 40 years at that time, and it resulted in the creation of a United Nations and a structure that fitted 1945. It does not fit 2025. We need to rethink this, and we need to do that in a way that brings people together to discuss what would be a better shape for an international order that then works out from the UN to other multilateral institutions. I think probably, given the mood of public opinion in the developed world about the size of government and waste, probably a slimmer organisation, a number of slimmer organisations, possibly where people make sacrifices to go and serve in them rather than increase their own personal wealth and resources because they get international jobs. I think we perhaps just need to rethink the model so that the public around the world can come in behind that and support it and see that as the future. To get rid of a UN Security Council where 5 states have a veto 80 years on from when that was possibly justifiable, and where the organisation is no longer able to make a really serious impact on conflict prevention or mediation as conflicts arise. Always trying to pick up the pieces afterwards rather than actually being in there at the start and avoiding the crisis as they develop. And then lastly, and this comes here at the ICD, I hope this is a pertinent point to have as my fifth point. I believe that in a world where everything is global, everything is also still very local. People's identity, their culture, really matters to them. And one of the reasons that we have issues around sovereignty and the European Union and parts of Europe, one of the reasons that we have conflicts in many countries around the world, whether they are currently active and violent or whether they are just latent and waiting to erupt again, is because of those differences in identity and culture that are not properly recognised and supported. And I think there's a real need. Yes, we have to work in a globalised economy and a globalised diplomacy and in a world where we have a global order that brings some sense to what's going on, but we also need through that to support and understand that people need a sense of belonging to their place, an identity, a recognition and support for their culture that makes them feel at home within that world order. And for example, I believe very strongly that instead of having a world where every single international institution works on the basis of the nation states and the nation state governments, that sub-state governments, and we have many good examples of this in Europe, sub-state governance, regional and national historic nations that are inside the nation states of the modern world, that sub-state governance has a key role, giving people some autonomy, some freedom to make their own decisions, even if they are part of a bigger decision, a bigger nation state, I think is absolutely critical. So reflecting a world order that reflects that identity, that local identity, the culture that comes with it and is central to it, I think is absolutely vital. And as we look to design and debate a new world order, I think we need to make sure that we remember that the local is just as important as the global. Thank you very much.